Will we hit the 1.5? Will we miss it? Science would tell you that most probably we're going to miss it. However, there's a huge difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees and 3 degrees. If you don't act to limit it, there's tremendous climate catastrophes that might happen.
Majd Fayyad is on a mission to turn climate ambition into action across the MENA region. As the founder of MajdTalks and a director and board member of the Advancing Net Zero volunteering team, he's built a reputation as a connector, bridging policy, industry, government, and education to create real-world climate impact. Named one of the top 50 sustainability leaders in MENA, 2023, by Sustainability Middle East magazine, Majd brings a rare blend of visionary thinking and hands-on expertise. From leading decarbonization efforts and transforming building standards to championing clean energy innovation, Majd's work is accelerating the region's transition to a more sustainable, resilient future.
The government role is extremely important because government provides the direction, the incentives, they remove the barriers. It provides the kind of the framework where you can facilitate climate action.
Yes.
The private sector also has a very important role in terms of delivering the right technologies, the innovations, the solutions that need to be present to support decarbonization. So what I'm trying to say here is that every stakeholder has a role to play, and achieving net zero wouldn't be possible if not every stakeholders play an active role. I think that hope is very important, especially at this stage. If there is no hope, this would lead to inaction.
Right.
And inaction is very dangerous. As I told you, there's a significant difference between 1.5, 2, and 3 degrees.
Yeah.
And inaction can result us going beyond 3 degrees even.
Wow.
So we need hope.
Yeah.
Because hope will drive action. I think that's a main message. We need to remain hopeful. It's a necessity for us to remain hopeful.
Majd, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's fantastic to have you. Let's start with Majd Fayyad. What led you down this road and what got you into sustainability?
So all of it started as coincidence. I started with mechanical engineering and renewable energy by coincidence.
Okay.
I started my first career 15 years ago in sustainability also by coincidence. I feel like kind of like my career has found me rather than going into finding my right career. And I started in sustainability that way. And I'm very lucky, honestly, that I started from day one working in the sustainability field. I didn't have any other job in other fields.
Were you passionate? Is it something that you always felt passionate about? Or is it something that you gained interest in? Or is it something that you felt, was your calling?
I'm always fascinated with the power of connection.
Okay.
If it's between people, between different elements of nature, between people and nature. So that's a big part to the reason why I found myself in that field.
Yeah.
But how I decided, is it because of my passion? No, it was total coincidence. If there is a coincidence in life, I think this is why you end up working in a field.
True.
Not by coincidence or by luck, it's just like it found you.
Yeah.
It finds you.
It's very true. Tell us more about your journey in the sustainable field. Tell us exactly, from your words, tell us about it.
So I currently, when I started working in sustainability, I was lucky, as I told you, to work from day one in sustainability. I've worked with government organizations and non-government organizations, and I've led several programs on decarbonization and sustainability. And this includes several topics: energy efficiency, renewable energy, green buildings, industries, circular economy. So I'm lucky that I got the chance to work on such transformational programs.
Yeah.
Currently, I work with the Dubai government, the Dubai Supreme Council of Energy, where I lead strategy and policy development of demand-side management and integrated water strategy. And most recently, I've launched an educational platform, a free educational platform.
Brilliant.
On sustainability and decarbonization, MajdTalks, which really aims to simplify sustainability topics and inspire people to take action.
Okay. And how have you found that? How have you found that step into educational? Is it what you expected? Is it easier? Is it something you wish you started sooner? Is it something
So throughout my career, I've worked in educational programs and awareness programs, and there's always a gap around sustainability topics.
Yeah.
And now with the climate action and climate change, the gap is even bigger. When you say climate action, you say net zero, net positive. There's many terminologies out
Yeah.
there, and even the specialists, the experts in the market, they lack the necessary knowledge.
Okay.
So that's the idea behind creating MajdTalks. And that's why I've seen also a great response from the market, from the experts, that there's a need for someone who's simplifying sustainability.
True.
And there's also a need for someone who's highlighting and showcasing sustainability efforts in this region.
Yeah.
So an additional part to MajdTalks is where I go and visit green projects.
Okay.
And I highlight what they have done, the approach that they took, and why it's successful.
Right.
And this inspires people.
Do you find that that's what's been missing for a lot of it is the, I don't want to use the term the common man, but for the common person to relate to an expert, that gap's been missing? That kind of...
So there's different levels of gaps. So there is a level of gap within the public, about sustainability, about the importance of sustainability. And there is another gap, which is not more about awareness, but more about responsibility.
Okay.
Do you feel responsible to take action or not?
Yeah.
And I think that's the main challenge that we have. People know that they need to sort their waste, that there is different ways that they need to take. Going by public transportation is better for the environment. That level of knowledge is there, but do they really act on it?
Yeah.
And I think that's the responsibility part of it, which is kind of missing.
Yeah, true. Now, as decarbonization expert yourself, what is, in your opinion, what is the state of climate action globally, and specifically in the MENA region?
So globally, we've seen a momentum towards climate action, especially in the last decade.
Yeah.
We've seen many companies committing to decarbonization to net zero by 2050. We've seen many strategies being developed and pathways being developed around net zero. We've also heard about many investments, major investments in clean technologies.
Yeah.
And I think what has changed in the conversation is that we shifted from discussing if we should act or not to how fast we should act.
Okay.
And that's very interesting. And we've seen it also in the region. And we've seen a great momentum in the region, UAE being the first in the region to commit to net zero by 2050. With targets and with emission reduction pathways by 2030, 2040, and 2050. We've also seen initiatives and targets by Saudi, by Oman, also major investments, not only in renewable and solar, which is the obvious solution for many, but also in emerging technologies, green hydrogen, clean hydrogen, carbon capture, and many others. So the momentum is there. We can see the momentum. The challenges are also there, honestly, especially in terms of scaling up these decarbonization efforts. But I think in this part of the world, with the government leading by example, with the government driving these efforts, I can see that there's significant work that has been done.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the measure? So globally, are we on target for 2025? When does the benchmark kick in? Is it 2030 is the next benchmark? We go, okay, we're good, we're bad, we're not good? Or is it still a changing process all the time?
So if we look at the targets, and so the main target is to achieve net zero by 2050.
Yeah.
But this doesn't mean that we wait to 2045 and we take aggressive action in the last 5 years and then we achieve net zero. Net zero is important because it's linked to global warming, the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And how fast you go to net zero will determine if you hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius or you go above it.
Okay.
So it's not only achieving net zero, it's also achieving net zero in the right way and the right pace.
Yeah.
Are we on target? There's a lot of studies around that. There's many international organizations working on that. There's the IPCC report in 2023, which which was called The Final Warning to the Climate Crisis. This is the title of the report. So imagine how critical it is. Will we hit the 1.5? Will we miss it? Science would tell you that most probably we're going to miss it. However, there's a huge difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees and 3 degrees. And if you don't act to limit it as per 2 or 1.5, there's tremendous or significant climate catastrophes that might happen.
Absolutely. But do you, like, as an expert, do you feel, best way to describe, are you happy with the progress at the moment, or do you feel optimistic? Do you feel as 2025 stands, we can do it?
So I think the main question is there hope?
Yeah.
Is there hope, or is it too late? I think that we need to really I think that hope is very important, especially at this stage, because hopelessness and being discouraged that all of these news and all of about climate, and then you're like, nothing will happen, we'll end up with the same way, and it's catastrophic. And this is dangerous because for us, if there is no hope, this would lead to inaction.
Right.
And inaction is very dangerous. As I told you, there's a significant difference between 1.5, 2, and 3 degrees.
Yeah.
And inaction can result us going beyond 3 degrees even.
Wow.
So we need hope.
Yeah.
Because hope will drive action. And I think that's a main message. We need to remain hopeful. It's a necessity for us to remain hopeful.
Interesting. So I have here, many people consider the government is the main stakeholder to drive climate action through policy. And what do you think on this?
I think government efforts and government is definitely a main stakeholder on decarbonization. However, government efforts on their own wouldn't help us to reach net zero. We need all stakeholders. We need active, and I stress on active, participation of all stakeholders. We're talking about the private sector.
Yeah.
We're talking about academia. We're talking about NGOs, investors. Everyone has a role to play. Even the public, end users and consumers have a role to play.
Yeah.
With government, the government role is extremely important because government provides the direction, the incentives, they remove the barriers. It provides the kind of the framework where you can facilitate climate action.
Yes.
The private sector also has a very important role in terms of delivering the right technologies, the innovations, the solutions that need to be present to support decarbonization.
Yes.
Also investors. So what I'm trying to say here is that every stakeholder has a role to play, and achieving net zero wouldn't be possible if not every stakeholders play an active role.
So everyone together needs to get involved.
Exactly.
And get the ball rolling. Majd, as a board member at Advancing Net Zero, what role do you see NGOs playing the climate action within the region?
So NGOs play a very important role because NGOs are kind of like the catalysts of change.
Right.
They bring different stakeholders together. They bring the government, the corporates, academia all together to discuss solutions, to discuss the challenges. They provide also, their role is very important also in terms of providing the gaps in knowledge, like through the studies, through capacity building. And we're lucky, that we launched the Advancing Net Zero 3 years ago. We're lucky to see that many people expressed interest. So that's a volunteering team where we base our work based on volunteering work from experts in the market.
Oh, wow.
And during the last, when we announced the program, we had more than 100 expert volunteers joining us.
Amazing.
And through these 3 years, it was an amazing journey where we had many programs, many events, many partnerships with leading organizations. We published several white papers. We focused on different areas. We focused on buildings.
Okay.
And the importance of retrofitting existing buildings to net zero. If you retrofit a building, it is quite important because you reduce your emissions, you reduce your energy use. But there's there must be a deep retrofit to a building to reach net zero. You need to reduce the energy use by 40 or 50%.
Wow.
So that's a deep retrofit study.
So the new builds now, is that the standard baseline, that the net zero?
The new builds, yeah. So the global targets on buildings, any new building needs to be net zero by 2030, and all buildings should be retrofitted to net zero by 2050 to align with the net zero targets. So as I told you, every stakeholder and every industry has a role to play in this game. And the building sector plays a very important role because buildings contribute to 40% of the global energy-related emissions.
Wow.
So focusing on the building sector is key.
Yeah.
Focusing on new buildings is very important. Focusing on existing buildings is also very important. And when you think of buildings, and this is also, I'd like to highlight it because when you think of buildings, you directly think about the energy use.
Yeah.
And that's your emissions. That's not only your emissions. Your emissions are also hidden in your walls because that material, the blocks that has been used in your building, is made of raw material that has been extracted, that has been processed, that has been transported to your building.
Yeah.
And that's what we call embodied emissions. They are like trapped in your building before you operate the building. So in order to achieve net zero buildings, you need to focus on both these operational emissions for your lighting and everything you used in terms of energy, but also your embodied emissions, which are the emissions associated with your building materials and the construction processes.
Interesting. So then does that go back to the government then? So the government can make a policy saying, right, if you want to make a new building, it has to be a net zero building. Is that how it can be from the top down?
So that's true. That's the building codes. Usually building codes, the government sets the building code and the requirements to build new buildings.
Yeah.
And as part of that building code, there is different requirements, and governments need to be aligning these requirements with the targets, with these global targets of net zero. For existing buildings, there is a different approach where you retrofit these buildings. You activate companies who are experts in energy retrofits to come into the building, do an energy audit, and then provide a recommendation. And then you do a retrofit. You replace some systems, you do some changes to your systems to reduce its consumption, and then you continuously improve the performance of your building.
Wow.
So there's two aspects to it.
I've never thought about, like, I always just assumed, I don't know why I assumed, I always just went kind of like, oh, the lighting, maybe the AC, maybe solar power. I never actually thought about materials or that deep others.
Yeah, it's major. 11% of the global emissions come, energy-related global emissions come from embodied emissions, and these emissions that are stuck in the building materials and the construction processes. This is 11% of the global emissions.
What about the role of the end user? And I was going to actually go on to this, is behavior and choices. So many think that, campaigns are directing human behavior are not effective. Will shifting behavior really reduce emissions, or is it just a campaign to divert attention from the real players? So this probably goes down to what we were saying before is, can Casey make a difference at home? Or is it just I'll let the government worry about it. It's a government issue. I'm not going to worry about it because, and then does it depend on where you live in the world to make those changes? Is it easier, for example, in Germany to make easy because they're it's much more forceful, the recycling campaigns and the cycling and public transport, as opposed to where we are now in Dubai, whereas I'm not really going to cycle to work because it's 50 degrees out, and I'm not going to, I'm going to drive because it's easier.
Brilliant question. So as I said before, every stakeholder has a role to play.
Yeah.
And end users and the public definitely have a role to play in terms of changing behavior. And it has been estimated that human behavior changes can contribute to up to 70% of the emission reductions required by 2050.
Okay, sure.
And that's when you have like comprehensive behavioral changes. And the word comprehensive is very important here because you need to have significant changes in the way you live, the way you travel, the way you consume. Everything about your life needs to be transformed. Interestingly, from another point of view, there's another study that has been done by the World Resources Institute that concludes that only 10% of this potential can be achieved.
Really?
So it's 70%, however, there's 10% that can be achieved.
Okay.
Why? Because when you ask people to do behavioral changes, you need to provide them the systems to be able to do that. So for example, if I ask you to go car-free to reduce your emissions, as a city, I need to provide you with the public transportation needed for you to travel. If I ask you to shift your vehicle to electric vehicle, I also need to provide you an infrastructure for electric vehicles, the charging stations, and all of that. So it is very important to a human behavior will play a very important role, but at the same time, a human behavior alone wouldn't be able to change if you don't provide it with the supporting systems, infrastructure, and policies that can enable these changes. So system changes are needed, and human behavioral changes are also needed.
But do you think then it's with that kind of shift, do you think it's more as opposed to like kind of say for myself, I'll go, right, I'm going to change. Is it a 2-3 year thing, or is it generational? Whereas you have to teach the children from a young age, transport is good, recycling is good, as opposed to someone who might feel guilty in their mid-40s to do it. It has to be a mindset.
So we are at a stage now where every action counts. We need to prepare definitely the future generation to be more responsible towards climate action and sustainability, but we also need to do changes to our own lives. So only targeting youth and new generation is not effective on its own. We need to target both.
I do try, and then I'll find myself, it's so controversial, I will find myself ordering a takeaway food. But I know that food has to come on a motorbike to me, but then I'll recycle the takeaway food. I find it...
Let me make it simpler to you, okay? Because this is also a very important topic, and sometimes it's overwhelming for the public. Like, what should I do? You ask me to do recycling. You ask me to turn off the lights. You ask me to compost my waste food and all of that. In terms of climate action and in terms of if you want to contribute to lowering your emissions, so the top 3 things that you can do, they will be the most effective. First of all, reducing your car trips.
Okay.
That's the top one. That's the most influence you can make because your transport is the highest, within the highest superior emissions. 2, less meat food and going more vegan.
Okay.
More vegetarian. 3, reducing your energy consumption in your house in terms of lighting and HVAC. These are 3 actions that will definitely have the most significant impact on climate change from an individual level. Other actions are very important, like composting and recycling and all of that is very important. But these, in terms of emissions, these are the top contributors.
And when you say, for example, how are they... I get the car emissions because I can tangible in my head go, I have took 50% less. With the meat one, how is that? Say, for example, I go, right, I'm going vegan, or I'm not vegan. Say I'm going to reduce them 50%. Okay, so I go to Spinneys 5 times a week. Now I'm only going to go twice a week and buy meat. How will I know that has an impact? Because if I still go to Spinneys, I still see the meat there. How do I kind of, relate to it? How do I know it's having an effect? Is there ways of...
First of all, there's many studies that will show you the difference in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of land use, in terms of water use between meat-based foods and vegan or vegetarian-based foods, plant-based. So the impact, you can see the impact. There's definitely a huge impact between switching from this to this. You will only see the difference if many people do the same. So one person changing, you would not cause a significant change, but many people, the impact is multiplied, and then you will see the difference. I have a fantastic video on MajdTalks on this topic, and I really answered the question using science-based and evidence-based research about, is going vegan the most eco-friendly solution?
Yeah.
And here I go into the carbon emissions, into water, into different aspects to it. And also there's also some aspects regarding going vegan, like almonds consume a lot of water, avocado as well, soy, there is major considerations around it, environmental considerations. So it is very important when we consider our diet is to consider a very balanced diet.
Yeah.
You don't need to go completely vegan to contribute, but if you reduce your meat and your chicken consumption, that's definitely going to contribute for sure.
What efforts can they take to align with climate action, and how can a company measure its impacts on climate change?
So as I mentioned, companies play a very important role.
Yeah.
And it starts with their own emissions. It starts with every companies to understand what emissions they have, if they burn fossil fuel in their facility or manufacturing, that's first what we call scope 1 emissions.
Okay.
There is scope 2 emissions, which is more about emissions associated to the energy they use. The electricity they use has been produced somewhere else by the utility, and it might have some emissions to it. So that's a second type of emissions. And the third type of emissions, which is usually underlooked, is kind of indirect emissions, or emissions similar to the emissions, embodied emissions that we spoke about with buildings. There are emissions associated with all the materials that you buy and use in your manufacturing process. There are also emissions that are that can be during the operations of the products that you use, also emissions related to the end of use of the products that you produce. So all of that. So this is what we call scope 3 emissions. And these are like indirect emissions that are connecting to the company's operations. And they're more related to the partners that you work with, the suppliers you work with, and the supply chain.
Right.
Usually these scope 3 emissions contributes the most to a company's emission. So 70%, or in some industries, it's 90%.
Wow.
So if you reduce your own emissions on the scope 1 and 2, you're just doing part of the solution.
Yeah.
So you need, first of all, to understand your emissions and then go into addressing the different types of emissions.
And do you think lately that the corporate world is much more they're much more socially aware of this? They're thinking about it much more? Or?
They're definitely thinking about it much more. And but addressing through scope 3 emissions is very challenging because there's many stakeholders involved.
Yeah.
Like me as a company, if I want to purchase raw materials to use in my facility, I need to speak to my suppliers and understand how my suppliers are getting these materials, how they're transporting them to me. And then the use of my products, how they're selling my product, how they're disposing my product at the end of life. So all of that, there's multiple players that are involved, and this adds to the level of complexity, honestly, to address scope 3 emissions.
And it must then also, obviously, the trick reason is the cost. There must be the balance of, if they go down 100%, they can go, we can do it, but
which will add to our cost.
And then the consumer is going to get hit, and then it's the
push it to the consumer.
Yeah.
But one thing that you also need to think about is that all the industries kind of need to be working towards decarbonization.
Yeah.
So if it's a supplier, manufacturer from one side, and another industry also working together, the packaging company is working, the food company should be working, and there is like collective efforts from different directions that will end up into But this doesn't mean it's less challenging, but there should be different actions happening across the supply chain.
But it's doable. It's not like before where maybe it wasn't, you go, well, it's no point because the packaging is pointless and this. Now, do you feel that there's much more people are more on board?
Yes, definitely the momentum is higher. We've seen many companies also committing to net zero. Many companies started disclosing their scope 3 emissions.
Oh,
Not
really?
only, that's very important. You start publicly disclosing what you have been doing, what's your impact in the market,
Yeah.
how you're going to achieve net zero. Many companies also activating the role within the industry, not only within their emissions, but also speaking to governments, speaking to different stakeholders, educating their suppliers,
Yeah.
educating the market around this topic. So
I think as well, I think if we'll go back to what we said earlier on, if more people had more knowledge, I think, for example, if they feel they couldn't do something personally themselves, but if they bought something from someone who was doing it, they might feel more attached to it. Like that's their contribution. If they, like, for example, if I couldn't reduce my trips in my car or whatever, I feel I wasn't doing enough. But if I got involved with a corporate world or a company that was doing it, then I'd feel better with it. I'd more likely go with the company that's making the effort as opposed to a company who's...
you remind me of a very interesting concept called the climate shadow. So it's more of rather than the influence that you're making, also how you're involved, how you're voting, how you're being part of this agenda. Are you working with a company that has emissions?
Yeah.
Are you voicing out that or not? Are you choosing a company that is responsible towards the climate? So that kind of describes your shadow on the climate.
Okay.
That's why it is. So it's quite important to address, if on personal level, your own choices in terms of what you use, what you consume, what you throw away, but also your decisions in your community. Your decisions are very influential. How you invest your money, that's also very influential. If you're investing them in a sustainable way, in sustainable companies or not. Also, are you working with the company that is committed to the climate action or not? So all of that definitely is part of your shadow.
Yeah.
Let's say
So what you call it again?
climate shadow.
Climate shadow. I like that. Sounds like a... I don't know. That sounds cool. I'm a part of climate shadow. Going beyond the footprint, in your opinion, how can companies drive change?
So definitely focusing on their emissions, first of all.
Right.
They need to be reducing their emissions and achieving net zero on the level of their operations. We spoke about scope 1, 2, and 3 and influencing the market. Another part of different types of scopes that we usually are not part of the protocols to disclosure protocols around climate is scope 4 and scope 5. For scope 4 here, it's more about the benefit from creating solutions that will decarbonize other industries.
Okay.
So for example, if I'm a company, an AI company, I develop a software, a solution for building owners to reduce their energy use, or they manage their energy in a way that they reduce the energy use and thus reducing the emissions. So here, as a company, I'm not only reducing my emissions, I'm reducing your emissions in your house. So I'm contributing to your emission reductions.
Right.
And that's what we call scope 4 emissions, or kind of avoided emissions that I'm not causing in the market.
Yeah.
Scope 5 is a bit tricky. It's more about how the company is influencing change in the market beyond its own emissions, how it's influencing the policy in a country or in community, how it's influencing the change of systems, the behavior of people. Is it slowing climate action or is it accelerating climate action? So that influence, similar to your influence in choosing a company that is more responsible, also the companies can work together into advocating towards stricter, for example, policies, into addressing some challenges with the government, into behavioral changes within people. So that's what we call scope 5 emissions. And it's really kind of the influence the company has on the market and how it can accelerate climate action.
Do you feel that it's companies are much more inclined to do the forward step, or do you feel companies are still, or the corporate is more reluctant?
I think companies are more now focusing on their operational emissions.
Yeah.
I consume this electricity, how can I reduce it? I burn this fossil fuel, how can I reduce it?
Yeah.
And it's very important to focus on these because these are direct emissions and you have direct influence into reducing them.
Yeah.
But I don't think many companies understand their role in the market in terms of pushing the market boundaries and raising the bar with other stakeholders and driving change. And really, when we talk about climate leadership, we're not only talking about you reducing your emissions, it's also the role you play in the society, in the country, and how you're driving your industry, other industries, and all the globe towards decarbonization.
Yeah. Do you feel that if, say for a company gets to a certain stage, is it easy to maintain it? As opposed to always working towards the goal, but if they get to say net zero, is it easy to maintain net zero then? Is that, or is it kind of like, well, we got to net zero, we can go back, or do you feel that they're going to?
So this goes back to the definition of net zero. So there's different definitions to net zero. There's net zero energy, where you, for example, produce the same amount of renewable energy to cover all your consumption. So you don't need additional, for example, electricity from the grid. The concept of net zero carbon, goes beyond that. So it goes to so all that operational carbon, as we mentioned, all of that embodied carbon that we mentioned, and how to first of all provide your own energy to offset your operational carbon, and reduce your embodied emissions, reduce it by the selection of materials, and then offsetting it through investments in other projects, because the carbon is emitted. So I'm not, how can I reduce it? I reduce it only by selecting products that are more eco-friendly, less carbon, they have less embodied emissions.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, once you achieve net zero, if you achieve net zero in a right way, you have your own systems in terms of renewable energy. You need to keep maintaining them to keep the net zero status.
Yeah.
If you don't maintain your own systems in your building, if you have the best system, that's the most energy efficient system out there, without periodic maintenance and without checking it out, and it will end up being not as designed. It will operate in a different way, and it will consume more energy. So to achieve a certain state is important, but also to maintain it is also very important.
Yeah. So you're working across different sectors: policy, industry, education. And I always like to end in this one. What keeps you hopeful, and what message would you like to leave for our audience?
So what keeps me hopeful is I'm a hopeful person in general, but I think it is extremely important, as I mentioned previously, that if we look at the different scenarios with climate, between 1.5 and the different impacts, 1.5 global warming, 2 degrees global warming, and 3, there is significant climate catastrophes between the difference between 1.5 and 2. So, and being hopeful, as I mentioned, is a must, is a necessity for us. It's a driver for change. And I think we need to understand that. We need to understand that our action, every individual has a role to play. Every individual can drive change. And I think a message that I like to leave is that people shouldn't underestimate their value and their effort. Once you start underestimating that I'm too small to take an action, I can't do change, this is beyond my capabilities, then you're gonna definitely not act. You need to believe that you can create change to create change. So I think that's a key message that I would lead to people to think about.
Brilliant, Majd. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
Really
having me.
appreciate it.
Very much enjoyed.
And your YouTube is
MajdTalks.
MajdTalks.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Majd.